Okay, so we're back. Just maybe coincidentally, as we were speaking about what governments could do with data on people's faces to infer their political orientation, it's somehow mysteriously cut. So we won't blame any specific cyberbots for this or governments. But Michal, you were saying, so what are examples that exist and that may exist where this kind of data could be used and misused and abused to, manipulate, control, or even imprison people based on what the AI says about people's faces?
Well, so first of all, I must say that while I would love to sometimes come up with some of those ideas myself, I'm in most cases just following in footsteps, and scientists in general and scholars in this area, in the area of computer science and AI, are unfortunately trailing behind by quite a lot. So for quite some time, governments and corporations have been using images of people's faces, not only to recognize and track people across, time and geographical space, but also to recognize their intimate psychological traits. And there are patents out there, and governments are officially looking for companies to help them to solve those problems. Now, what's happening on the scholarly side of the debate is that essentially scientists assume, well, this is not possible. You cannot tell anything about a person from the face, which essentially means that this, what I believe is huge privacy risk, is absolutely ignored. Essentially, no one is even talking about this because people assume that it's just not possible. So now my research shows that unfortunately, those widely used technologies used by companies and governments all around the world are pretty accurate when predicting intimate traits such as sexual orientation, political orientation, personality, and other traits from people's faces. And now when people say, well, but we can just try to hide our faces and maybe remove our profile images from the internet and so on. First of all, this is not happening. This is way too convenient and too wonderful to boast to our friends on Instagram or Facebook about this new amazing trip that we went to, for us to actually stop posting pictures of our faces everywhere and start wearing some masks while walking the streets in the public, where the CCTV cameras can also take a picture of our face. But even if this was possible, my other research shows that your digital footprint, such as your tweets or status updates or your likes or your history of bank transactions or history of website browsing or Google searches, is as revealing, actually it's much more revealing about your intimate traits than a single image of your face. So essentially, unfortunately, there's no going back from motivated third parties being able to create infer intimate psychological traits of millions of billions of people.
What about, I assume, there could potentially also be positive or moral, ethical, pro-social uses and application of that. I mean, right now, a lot of governments, including the ones that traditionally don't do so, are adopting, trace and track apps and looking at kind of these type of data and using surveillance AI really apparently to keep people safe and protected. And you have to, assume that in some instances that is the true intention.
It's interesting that you have said that, because governments have been tracking people forever. It's just different departments. It wasn't a health ministry that was tracking people. It was, GCHQ in Britain or CIA over here or NSA in America, right? So agencies have been doing it legally or illegally for quite some time already. Why? Because first of all, it's so easy. And second of all, it's so bloody useful. If your work is to, track the spread of, money laundering or drug trade or terrorist networks, this is essentially a very easy way of achieving that, compared with, a James Bond style operations and infiltration of, facilities of people. If you can just snoop on their network, it's just so much more easy. So I think that essentially, and there are, as you say, there's huge benefits. of those technologies. And I would say that the great majority of applications are actually have a great potential to make our lives easier and healthier and longer and safer and so on. So like just one example, matching people with jobs. Now, if you're a wealthy, spoiled citizen of an affluent country, you have access to career advisors and great education and recruiters that know what they're doing and so on. But even in places like America or Europe, which are extremely privileged on a global scale, plenty of people are deprived of the benefits of career planning. Why? Because career planners, career advisors, and people who know how to develop and deploy psychological assessment, occupational assessment tools, their time is extremely expensive. Now, if we can replace those expensive advisors with algorithms that can provide you with the same level or potentially better services at the fraction of the cost, suddenly we can spread the benefits of occupational assessment to essentially everyone in the world. Now, the same applies to clinical assessment. If you're wealthy and privileged, you have your psychologists or psychotherapists, you pay them however many hundreds of dollars per hour, and both sides of the transactions are really happy. There are places in the world when there's literally, no psychiatrists or no psychologists in the entire country. And people there, however wealthy they are, and most of them are not, have zero access to high quality services of this kind. Now, if we can replace this expensive specialist with a cheap algorithm, we can spread the benefits of this and many other places where psychological assessment is useful to everyone on the planet.
So in a way, technology and specifically AI could kind of scale what traditional assessment failed to scale or, penetrate at scale because of those constraints of time and money. Do you see a similar opportunity to apply it to the realm of love and relationships and, dating?
Oh, we're already applying it in this realm to a large extent. It's just that the dating platforms that we're using at the moment, the incentives are not set right. So a dating platform charges people for being single. You pay the dating platform as long as you're single. So if we understand how incentives work, then of course the dating platform is incentivized to keep us single as long as possible. And the solution to do it is to match us with people that we want to go on a date the most, and not people that we're going to form a long-lasting and happy relationship, which will make us stop paying their fees every month. Yeah. So of course, dating platforms are using very advanced algorithms, and those algorithms are great, but not at matching with ideal partners. They're great at matching with partners that you're really into and really want to go on a date with, and the algorithm is quite sure that you will be back in a week or so to paying, Tinder fees.
So I know you talked about the death of privacy already, and that, your view is that privacy no longer exists or has been diluted to, a really trivial and insignificant level. What does the near future look like? I mean, governments everywhere and companies everywhere having lots of data that enables them to know and even influence people really well. So the main differentiator is in whether they do good or bad with that information. And that's the difference between a better and a worse society. Or what do you think, what does this look like in the realm of good and bad governments and the welfare or well-being of the people?
Well, I must say that on one hand, I'm a bit worried. This is why I'm a privacy researcher, because I originally thought some years ago that maybe if we just put some effort into understanding privacy risks, then we could stop the erosion of privacy and essentially give privacy back to people, individuals, and societies. Now, I increasingly believe that it's absolutely impossible, that essentially we lost this war or this battle. Those technologies that take our privacy away, they're just too bloody useful for people to give them away. And people seem not to care about privacy enough to give up Facebook, Google, and go back to essentially pre-information age just to protect their privacy. And unfortunately, as long as we're staying in an information age, our privacy is gone. You can try to regulate Facebook and Google not to abuse our privacy, but try to regulate foreign governments or a small startup that has nothing to lose, or hackers to protect people's privacy. So I'm leaning towards a very different approach these days. I'm leaning towards essentially embracing this unfortunate fact that we lost our privacy and trying to get as many benefits out of it as possible. And there are many benefits of losing privacy. Like, for example, you and me are losing privacy, but the same applies to corrupt politicians and criminals and human traffickers and all sorts of other organizations.
Weinstein, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you really believe that there are people really trying to invade your privacy, believe me, there are way many more people trying to invade privacy of politicians and decision makers working on high, you know, in high responsible positions. Meaning, essentially, that in a way, losing privacy is not affecting the poorest and underprivileged the most. It's actually probably affecting the most privileged the most, and bringing a bit more equality to this world. We have many, you know, examples of Snowden, for example, you know, where the organization lost its privacy, but yet society gained way more insight into how things work in those mysterious organizations. I think there are definitely some benefits. The same, you know, those technologies that can be used to take our privacy away, like Facebook and Google and Gmail, are also making our lives easier and better connected and more efficient. So I think that the trick is probably to accept, instead of trying to fight this battle that we already lost, trying to get our privacy back, I think that it would be better to embrace this fact and try to prepare our society for the post-privacy age. And let me give you one example. So people freak out about some of their intimate traits now becoming, maybe not publicly known, but becoming easily exposable to a motivated third party. Like sexual orientation, in the past, I had some control over whether I want to share my sexual orientation with others or not. Now it turns out that Gmail, Google, Facebook, my government, Saudi Arabian government, Twitter, and a bunch of other organizations and companies can essentially extremely easily expose my sexual orientation just by looking at the history of my use of dating websites. Or even if I abstain from using dating websites, it turns out that even my Spotify playlist or my picture of my face is to a large extent revealing of my sexual orientation. So the kind of the reaction, the intuitive reaction to this fact is, let's just try to reorganize the technological world to protect privacy of sexual orientation. Now, the problem is that it's not possible. But we have examples of traits that, on one hand, we would want to protect the privacy of, like gender. Living in a sexist world, and you know, probably two white males talking about this is not, we cannot speak from our own experience, but it would be better for women out there if they had an option of withdrawing information about the gender, let's say in the context of seeking a job or seeking a political position where essentially there's a lot of sexism involved. But now if you made an argument that the solution to sexism is to give people privacy of the gender, this would be, first of all, not only impossible, but also borderline offensive. The solution to sexism is not give people privacy of gender, it's work hard to make sure that the society is equal one. And the same relates to sexual orientation. If Saudi Arabians essentially have laws that condemn you to death if you're found gay, the solution to this is not give gay people right to privacy. As much as I would like such rights to be there, it's just becoming impossible in the current technological environment. But the solution to this is to force groups and societies to repeal such inhumane and absolutely unacceptable laws.
Yeah, because otherwise it's a little bit like saying, let's teach people to fool the algorithms and behave in ways that, you know, are deceptive and enable them to maintain certain traits or habits or orientations secret. but that's not solving the underlying or underpinning issue, right?
And no one wants to live in the world where we have to hide, where we have to spend a lot of time and effort trying to hide our sexual orientation, for example, or religion or political views. Not to mention that, guess what? Algorithms are just going to be a step ahead of us all the time. It's the same as with lying. You know, the better we are at hiding our lives, the better other people become, not only in their lifetime, but also evolutionary speaking, the better other people become at detecting when we are lying. It's an arms race.
Okay, so let me ask you the final question, Michal, before I give you back your privacy or whatever is left of it, since you have Alexa in the house and probably other devices, and you said your neighbors who can still see through your windows unless those curtains are installed already, but that's kind of like more old-fashioned espionage, which seems quite romantic and kind of you know, more at least nostalgic. What does the world look like after this, or when we, you know, transition to the new, not normal, whatever that is, and especially the world of work? Do you see a return to the office? Does it systematically change the dynamics of kind of working, shifts, careers, jobs? Where do you see the short term kind of going?
Well, I think that there will be tremendous changes for sure, and there's no going back to normal. First of all, the occupational world is going to be very different. Essentially, the entire world got a crash course in remote work in last months, and suddenly it turns out that remote work is in many ways more efficient and cheaper and more satisfying both for bosses and for their employees. That it turns out that, and there's some unexpected outcomes that I've never thought about. Like, if you have an in-person meeting, then the most arrogant, the loudest person, that usually is essentially me, a white male, usually speaks the most, and people who know more and have much better ideas than I do are very often quiet because of being more introverted, or maybe being less arrogant, or being just raised to be quieter, or just being quieter. Now, it turns out that when you move those meetings to Zoom settings, now the culture changes, and suddenly those members of the team that traditionally were a bit more quiet participate more in conversations. Now, it turns out that having your notes open in front of you when you have a meeting like this, or maybe even demanding that decisions are not made in person on the meeting, but are made somewhere, you know, on Slack or through email, suddenly the decisions are more thoughtful, because people, instead of making them in the heat of the moment, being influenced by someone like me who speaks the louder, actually take some time to reason and think what the good path forward might be. So that's definitely changing organizations in a very meaningful way. And this, of course, has tremendous consequences. If suddenly employing a person living in Bangladesh is kind of the same as employing a person living in Silicon Valley, because they're going to work remotely anyway, suddenly it turns out that employing someone in Bangladesh might be a much better choice, because there might be a better expert, there's less competition on the job market there, and maybe they're also, their living costs are lower. So it has tremendous consequences potentially for essentially spreading the wealth and affluence more across the world. But it also has more local effects. Like, think about the property market. Now that you realize you don't really need to live in San Francisco to work for Twitter, but you can work somewhere on the ranch in Arizona, maybe those exorbitant prices in those cities that essentially became too crowded and too inefficient will essentially go down, solving problems such as homelessness, or problems such as the fact that even a professional with a relatively good job cannot really afford a place to live in a Bay Area.
Yeah, so we should buy property in Bangladesh if the Silicon Valley pattern is to be repeated, for sure, and do it as soon as possible. All these efficiency gains, do you think they're making humans better, or have we stagnated from a moral standpoint? I know this is kind of a, you know, big and almost metaphysical question, but what is your sense, and how optimistic are you about us in this new world, or, you know, future around the corner world of technology?
Oh, I'm a big optimist. We are getting so much better with every year. We are the most connected, most educated, and most free society that has ever existed. And, you know, the same technologies that we rightly so are worried about, think internet or social networks. The same technologies that have risks that we're discussing here today enable us to communicate outside of the control of the government, exchange ideas way more freely than we ever could, despite all of their drawbacks and problems that some of them we have discussed today. And there's a lot of empirical evidence that humans have never been so liberal and so progressive and so tolerant. But of course, our standards are growing even more quickly. Something that no one would even, notice 10 years or 20 years ago, and certainly would not go out and spend 10 days now or more protesting about. Suddenly, the standards are raising much more quickly than the reality and can catch up with, motivates people to essentially take radical action. So I'm a big optimist, and I think that our lives are just getting better with every day. And of course, sometimes we make a little step back in one domain, but in the meantime, we're taking many steps forward in many other domains. So I'm a big optimist.
Michal, thank you so much for your time. It's been a great pleasure and lovely to catch up. If people want to find out more about your work, what's the best place to go? Would it be your website where they can find a collection of kind of your work and ideas, etc.?
It will be my website, michalkosinski.com.
Okay, and I'll post it so there's no misspellings from the non-Polish crowd out there, which I'm sure will include many. Thank you so much, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Thomas.